I wrote about Newport so I could stop being classified as a Southern writer. I'm not a Southerner. I'm not a Civil War novelist. I'm just a novelist. But beyond that, I have always loved Newport since I first saw it in the late 70s because it is American history preserved. They have kept so many of those great houses. They have kept them going. You can look at them today. So many places in America anymore, historical locations are gone. I cited in the afterword to the novel my enthusiastic trip to Boston to see, among other things, the location of the Boston Tea Party, which turned out to be a sort of a bilious green office building with a brass plaque on it. And we've done that all over the country. Newport has not done that to that great an extent, and consequently, it is a place that I think every American can visit and grasp a little bit of what history was like at that particular moment. Originally, I visited Newport in 1978 to do the research for one section of the last novel of the Kent Family Chronicles, which had a section involving Newport and one of the fictional characters. I've been back several times since because I like the place. Consequently, it wasn't a strange locale to me, and I was lucky enough through the good offices of a lady up there who was an experienced guide to turn up Peter Roos at the Newport Preservation Foundation, who became my boots on the ground, so to speak. Peter has been in Newport 12, 15 years. He knows all of the houses. If he doesn't know who lived where, when, he knows how to find it. And what he did after I paid several visits up there was to save me a lot of time, because I could just email him and I'd say, well, you know, Mamie Fish didn't build her house until after the time of the story, built her great house. So where did she stay? Well, they have records of that. Really, the attraction seems to have been all of these very, very bright people who were national figures, Longfellow and Oliver Wendell Holmes, and particularly Julia Ward Howe. We've kind of forgotten her, but that time she was regarded as one of the leading intellectuals of the world. The European press called her the Queen of America. There were scores more whose names I have in my computer somewhere, but are lesser lights, but nevertheless are poets and architects, and they gathered there in the summer. And that attracted Mrs. Astor in the early 1880s. She bought and renovated a house there and thereby put her stamp of approval on the place, and the stampede was on. There are lots of real people, and they are so eccentric and raffish that I've often said if I walked into the editor's office with a novel in which all these people were fictitious, he'd simply throw the manuscript back in my face and say, get out of here, you know, people like this don't exist. Well, they really did, and they had parties like this. So there was a whole roster of them, from Jim Fisk and Dan Drew and Jay Gould, the robber barons at the beginning, into Newport itself with the Mrs. Astor and my favorite, Mamie Fish, Mrs. Stuyvesant Fish, the social gadflies, Ward McAllister and Harry Lair, the publisher, James Gordon Bennett. There's so many real people in there. And their behavior in some cases is so bizarre that no novelist could resist that. In the 1890s, the parties became marks of social distinction because they always had to have a theme, very often costumes. The dinner part of the evening usually lasted 3 hours. Mamie Fish hated that. She wanted dinner served and out of the way in 45 minutes. But they had such things as pastoral dinner with everybody dressed as shepherds and shepherdesses, and virtually any theme you could think of they had. And the idea was to out-impress the givers of the last party. Generally, these extravagant evenings, which featured musicians and anything but actresses and actors. That was a no-no. Mrs. Astor didn't care for that. Generally cost on the order of $7,500,000 to put on in $1,890, and that's a lot of money. That's how you kept your cachet in that world. All during this time, there was a terrific moral outcry against Newport. Newspaper editorials thundered about the hedonistic behavior of these people up there. A lot of ministers took to the pulpit and condemned the foolishness and the extravagance of Newport parties and behavior. And of course, one of my favorite characters, Colonel Mann, who published Town Topics, the scandal newspaper. Well, not entirely scandal, but he did have one scandal section. Claimed to be a moralistic reformer of Newport. And he said that's why he published these little vaguely disguised stories of misbehavior. Actually, what he was doing was running up a proof and then calling the person to his table at Delmonico's in New York and saying, here, take a look at this. I'm going to publish this in 2 weeks, or would you rather negotiate to have it suppressed? And generally, he would get some money, and the story would never appear. The moral issue finally became significant. People got tired of reading about these antics. Society columns, while they continued to exist, didn't have the prominence or the drawing power that they did in the 1880s and the 1890s. And then, of course, the biggest factor of all is the progressive income tax, which came in after the start of the 20th century. And people no longer quite spent so freely. Newport, of course, existed as a social center well into the 30s, and there are even survivors today of the old social elite. But by the 20s, it was largely out of the picture.